There's something most people never question about money, not because it's invisible, but because it's too consistent to notice. Some people chase money their entire lives, and it keeps slipping through their hands. Others seem to attract it effortlessly, repeatedly, almost predictably. Same world, same economy, same opportunities, but completely different outcomes. And the explanation most people settle for is simple. They're lucky. They're smarter. They have better connections. But if you study long enough, if you observe carefully enough, you start to see something uncomfortable. The difference is not just what they do, it's what they understand that others don't. Because money or it is not just physical, that's the first mistake. You've been trained to think of money as numbers, income, expenses, savings, investments, all measurable, all visible. But what if the visible part is only the surface? What if money behaves more like a current than a possession? Something that flows, something that moves, something that responds. And like anything that flows, it follows laws, not man-made laws, not economic theories, deeper laws. Laws that existed long before currency, long before banks, long before modern systems were even imagined. There was a time when wealth was understood differently, not as accumulation, but as alignment. And in that understanding, there was a principle most people today would dismiss, that certain physical elements, when used with intention, could influence the flow of abundance, not symbolically, practically. One of those elements was something so ordinary, most people overlook it completely. Salt. Not expensive, not rare, not complex, but according to ancient teachings, extremely powerful. Now, most people will hear that and immediately reject it because it doesn't fit into modern logic. But here's the problem with modern logic. It explains outcomes after they happen. It rarely explains why certain people consistently win while others consistently struggle. Because the real mechanisms are not always visible. And the people who understood that didn't treat money casually. They treated it as something that required preparation, not just effort. Preparation. There's an idea that has been passed down quietly for generations, that before you touch money, you should first align yourself with it, not mentally, not emotionally, physically, through a process. Because money in its deepest sense is not just something you earn, it's something you interact with. And how you interact with it determines how it behaves in your life. Most people's interaction with money is reactive. They receive it, they spend it, they worry about it, they try to control it, but they never prepare for it. And that's where the difference begins. There was a moment where this understanding becomes very clear. A young man, completely broke, not metaphorically, literally, searching for coins in places coins shouldn't be, trying everything the world told him would work. Applications, side hustles, requests for help, nothing changed. And at that point, he had two options. He continued doing more of what wasn't working, or try something that didn't make immediate sense. He chose the second, not out of belief, but out of necessity. He followed a method he had been taught years earlier, not fully understanding it, not fully believing it, but applying it exactly. And within days, things began to shift, not gradually, not subtly, clearly. Opportunities appeared. Money came from unexpected places. Conversations turned into openings. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't luck. It was activation. Because there are laws that govern how things move toward you. And most people are completely unaware of them. Now here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Hard work alone is not enough. Necessary? Yes, but not sufficient. Because without alignment, hard work becomes repetition, effort without direction, motion without progress. And that's why so many people feel stuck. They're doing more, but not moving forward. because the system they're operating in is incomplete. They're addressing the physical level while ignoring the level where everything begins, the level of cause. Before money appears, it exists as possibility. Before opportunity arrives, it exists as potential. And what determines whether that potential becomes reality is alignment. That's why two people can do the same thing and get completely different results. One is aligned, the other is not. Now, this is where the idea of ritual comes in, not as superstition, but as structure, a way to interact with forces that are otherwise invisible. Salt, in ancient understanding, was not just a substance. It represented preservation, purification, stability. It was used in sacred practices, not because it was symbolic, but because it was functional. Combined with water, which represents flow, it creates something interesting, a balance between holding and moving, between structure and flexibility. And that balance is exactly what wealth requires. Too much holding and nothing moves. Too much flow and nothing stays. So the system must be balanced, and the ritual is designed to create that balance, not randomly, precisely, at a specific time, with specific elements, in a specific order. Because timing matters. The moment just before sunrise is not just another moment. It's a transition from darkness to light, from stillness to movement, from hidden to visible. And transitions are where change happens. So performing an action at that moment amplifies its effect, not magically, naturally. Now here's where most people make the mistake. They try to modify the process. They skip steps. They adjust details. They make it easier. And then they say it doesn't work. But the process was never designed to be convenient. It was designed to be effective. And effectiveness requires precision because each element serves a purpose. Each step builds on the previous one. Remove one, and the structure weakens. And this is where discipline becomes important because understanding alone does nothing. Execution changes everything. There was a point where even someone who understood this deeply stopped practicing it, not out of disbelief, but out of distraction. Life became busy. Success created comfort. And slowly, the practice faded. At first, nothing seemed wrong. But over time, things began to shift. Not dramatically, but noticeably. More pressure, less ease, more effort, less return. And that's when the realization came back. This isn't something you learn once. It's something you maintain. Because alignment is not permanent. It requires consistency. So the practice resumed. And once again, things shifted because the system responded, not to knowledge, but to action. And that's the difference most people never cross. They collect information, but they don't apply it. They understand concepts, but they don't execute consistently. And so nothing changes because nothing was activated. Now, here's what you need to understand clearly. Wait, this is not about believing in something blindly. It's about testing a system that has worked repeatedly over time, not once, not twice, but across generations, across environments, across circumstances. Because truth doesn't depend on context. It produces results when applied correctly. So the question is not, does this make sense to me right now? The question is, am I willing to test something different after everything else hasn't worked? Because that's where change begins, not in comfort, but in decision. And once you make that decision, you commit to the process, not halfway, not temporarily, completely. Because partial action creates partial results, and partial results don't change your life. Full execution does. And so if you've been stuck, if you've been trying, if you've been doing everything you were told, and nothing has truly changed, then maybe it's not your effort that's wrong. Maybe it's your alignment. And once alignment shifts, everything else follows. Because money doesn't just respond to what you do, it responds to how you're positioned. And when your position changes, flow changes. Opportunities feel different. Decisions become clearer. Movement becomes easier. And suddenly, what used to feel impossible becomes normal. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And that's where everything begins.